Hey everyone, good afternoon, good morning to you, wherever you're joining me from. My name is Barton Seaver, and I am joining you from the ragged, jagged, delicious coast of Maine, where me and my beloved family live here on my garlic farm right on the water. Life is good, and I hope that life is good for you as well. It's so nice to be back here with y'all. It's been a minute. I think maybe Thanksgiving even since last I saw you. So I appreciate all of you, some old friends that are joining again. I already see some great questions from you. GDT especially. You always come through, appreciate it, and Chris E as well. So nice to see old friends, as well as to have any of you that are new to the Rouxbe family joining us here. We do these events, well, I'm not sure of the schedule of them these days, but we do them because we love to see you and interact with you and treat them really as sort of an open office hours, if you will. That, today is Spice It Up. So spice is the theme, but that is not the only thing we'll be talking about. So whatever questions you've got, pots and pans I see coming in a little bit here as well, all of that is fair game. So a couple things. First off, just logistically speaking, you're watching me on that video screen over there. You've got my Instagram handle under there at Barton Seaver. Over on the right-hand side, you're going to see that questions box over at the top. Anything that you'd like to ask me or comment on, please, if you have your own comments to throw in around spices, because this is a topic that is worldwide, and I'm certainly not an expert in everything. Few things really, but please feel free to throw in your own comments today as well. So lots of questions. If there is a question that has already been asked, just click that little heart icon. And what that does is it votes it up to the top to make sure that I get to it. Today, I've got a pretty hard out because I've got my parent-teacher meeting for my beloved little 6-year-old Alden today. And I expect to hear some fun news. And yeah, life is good. Life is good. I got a brilliant, courageous wife who still likes me. I got 2 healthy kids that we really like too. I live on a garlic farm. There's not too much snow on the ground. It's Maine. I'm wearing a t-shirt today. My t-shirt says, "I love you so much," because it's true. So any of you who have joined me before know that I like to start off with a little moment of gratitude. Why? Because the most important ingredient in any meal that we cook is gratitude and love for those that we are about to feed and that we are so blessed to feed. So something I'm grateful for today, well, certainly for coming back to you in all of this, but yeah, I'm going to say I'm grateful for my little guy and the fact that I get to go explore or hear about the world that he's exploring with his teacher today, and just hear about the entire world that he lives in that is not mine, and that it's its own little, thing here at school. And I'm just so pleased and grateful to be a part of that. So I hope that you will take a moment to just think about something that you are grateful for when you next sit down to your cutting board, stand in front of your refrigerator thinking about what's for dinner. Let's just be grateful for the food that we have and those that we are able to feed. All right, cool. Spices. Let's dive into this. What are spices, first and foremost? Well, spices are things that we add to our food. They come from all different sources, whether they're rhizomes like turmeric, ginger, garlic, whether they're plants, leafy plants, rosemary, thyme, oregano, mint, basil, etc., or whether they're like saffron and they're the stamen of a plant, of a flower. What else do we have? Oh, lots of seeds and berries. All sorts of things end up being called spices. Where do spices come from? Not Antarctica, not the polar regions so much, and everywhere else, yes, they do come from there. So there's a lot of spice trade, of course, is one of the world's first really global economies. And so spices and their trade, they were once as valuable as was anything, and their commerce brought incredible, economic wealth to all sorts of regions, as well as all of the depredations that come with global economies and colonialism and all that. I'm not going to dive into that today, because now we have wonderful ethical sources of spices that we can buy, and they do really come to us from all over the world. And you wonder maybe why I'm looking over there. It's because that's my spice wall. It's not a spice wall. It's 2 tiny shelves above a radio next to my stove, which is where I keep them. So let's talk about, now that we've talked about what are spices, let's talk about shelf life and sort of how to store them. So I'm actually going to walk over there. And in order to do so and take the camera with me, I have to do this funny little camera motion. So yeah, okay. But it caught me now. It caught me, and watch this. I figured out technology, and then I lock it on me. Wow, that's really cool. And I'm going to ask Patrick, who's my colleague at Rouxbe, who's behind the scenes, to whisper into my ear if there's anything amiss with this framing here. But otherwise, here's what I've got. This is my spice rack. And yeah, I'm very lucky. I have these wonderful copper pans, and it's just pleasant, and it makes me happy to be over here and to look at this. This is our clock with the tide on it as well, because that's very important to us here when you live a maritime life, right? And this is our very old analog stereo that we listen to NPR on, because it just kind of feels right. Anyway, back to spices. So I have just this Christmas, I had asked my wife for a spice organization, something to make it look a little bit nicer, because it is on such full display in our kitchen. We have open cabinets. Well, we have open shelves and no cabinets to hide anything behind. So to me, that aesthetic was pretty important. But let me say something. The best way to store spices is keep them away from light and keep them cool and at a relatively stable temperature, right? So here in Maine, it never really gets too hot, and cold is really not a problem so much for spices. So the problem here is the light. So I bought, for Christmas, my wife got me these very nice little vials, and I have 24 of them. And the other thing I like about that is that it keeps me relatively honest in the number of spices that I have. Because guess what? I could fill up this entire wall. There's entire stores and chains of stores dedicated to spices. I don't use that many. I use about 20. I use probably about 30 of them. And a good number of those are different chili flakes. So I just count that as one. So I'm still under the radar here. But this is what I've got. And the other key to this, the reason why I'm okay storing them in light, is that, well, I use my spices. I use them a lot. It's not something to me that should be relegated to the back corner of a cabinet that you forget about. And you know what? If you are doing this really awesome dish that you found online, that you got inspired by a cookbook to do, and it includes, of course, everybody's favorite spice, the makrut lime leaf powder. Huh? Well, guess what? I went out and got makrut lime leaf powder, and guess what I didn't need for that recipe? A whole lot of makrut lime leaf powder. So you know what I've been doing? I've been putting it on everything ever since and learning how to use it. So to me, finding a recipe that has those intricate spices in it, those unfamiliar spices in it, I take that as a challenge. And I'll take that initial recipe as my means of introduction. Like, okay, makrut lime leaf powder, you and I are now acquainted. Now we're going to get friendly. Okay, so I've just started learning how to use it. And, you know, I might not buy it again, but there are things that I have just found that are truly incredible. Actually, that makrut lime leaf will be a staple in my kitchen from now on. But I like to do that rather than just relegate it back to the, back of a cabinet, or not cook that recipe that you got really excited about, or not do it authentically because you didn't find that spice. To me, in my world of cooking, where my whole life focuses on this, for which I'm lucky, I have a great opportunity to do just that. So I've got things in here that are fun. I've got things in here that I use a whole lot of. Fennel seeds, I buy by the pound just because I put them in absolutely everything. Bay leaves I buy by the pound. And any of you who've joined me before know I talk about my barrel of bay leaves, because guess how many bay leaves you need to make a pound? About 30,000, I think. So whenever I'm making chicken stock, guess what goes in? About 200 bay leaves. Why? Well, because it tastes good and I have them. So with some spices, you need to just figure out a way to use what you've got. So I'll be coming back to this a little bit later. We've got a couple of other things that I want to talk about. So I'm going to do that weird hand motion again. Wait till my camera acknowledges me. Come over here. Do this. Okay. Okay. And then I come down here, which is pretty awkward, right? Did I get it? All right, cool. Look at that. All right. We figured this out. So a couple other things I wanted to talk about. Shelf life. Actually, when I first met my wife, maybe the second time that I'd gone over to her parents' house, I thought I was doing her mother a favor and went through the spice cabinet and found lots of jars of spices that were generations old, and made some suggestions about getting rid of them, and it wasn't taken very well. And yeah, it's all about learning where your boundaries are with your new family, right? Sandy, I love you. She's the most wonderful mother-in-law there is. And I'm sorry that I took your spices out of your cabinet. Enjoy them. Anyway, so we've talked about how to store them. We've talked about sort of what they are. Let's talk about something we're not going to, well, yeah, we'll talk a little bit about it today. Salt, right? Because salt, though it's a mineral, right? It's mined from the earth or found from the ocean in dehydration, et cetera, et cetera. We use salt in the same way that we use spices, right? So it kind of makes sense that we would talk about salt. So my brief bit on salt here is I use one kind of salt and one kind only, and that is the red box of the Diamond Crystal kosher salt. Why? Because salting to me is a physical memory, right? If I have a piece of fish in front of me that's this big and this thick, I go like this, and I know exactly how much I am seasoning that piece of fish. Why? Because I have done that likely over 2 million times in my restaurant and culinary career and all the cooking that I've done. I got salt in front of me. So that physical memory of picking up exactly this much salt, knowing what it is between the 4 fingers in my hand that I'm picking it up with, knowing exactly that takes a lot of stress out of things. It also just sort of begins to really engage your intuition in terms of cooking. So why do I use only one kind of salt? Because the volumes and salinities of salt, the physical volume and salinity of salt change, even from Morton's kosher salt to Diamond Crystal kosher salt. Certainly with sea salts, you get different size chunks, flakes, Maldon salt, they all dissolve differently. So they soak into proteins or vegetables differently, etc. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. All I'm saying is that this is the one that I know how to use better than all of the others. And that's why I use it, right? There's a lot of other people that tend to use this very same salt. So I'm not alone on having this as my preference, but the key here is for you to use the salt that you know how to use best. And that's up to you to decide which one. Cool. Salt lesson over. Let's get on to toasting spices. So this gets into how to use spices. So there are spices that we use at the beginning of dishes. There are spices that we can use to season throughout. There are spices that we might use at the very end to season something. How those get added in really matters. So take something like smoked paprika, or just regular paprika in like the Hungarian dish goulash, right? So paprikas and capsicums, anything that's really been dehydrated and pulverized, is going to either be fat soluble or water soluble. So take some paprika and put it on top of a glass of water and stir it up. Those grains stay largely separate. It'll, over time, yes, they'll rehydrate, but they kind of stay separate. As opposed to take some garlic powder and put that in and mix it up. And what you're going to find is that within just a minute or so, that powder is going to be really integrated. But more so is important is that the flavor is really integrated. You're going to have water with some paprika on it. With garlic, you're going to have garlic flavored water. So how that matters is that if you're starting at the beginning of a dish with paprika, say, you want to start it and introduce it through fat, whether it's olive oil, whether it's butter, whether it's just a regular oil, etc. What that does is it not only toasts, which we'll talk about in a second, and blooms the flavors and their aromas. What it does also is it carries that spice throughout. It really integrates it throughout the entire dish in ways that are, I think, fundamental to the success of that dish. So I know we've got a lot of folks that typically join us here at Rouxbe that are on whole food plant-based diets and so aren't using fat, etc. In their dishes. And is that going to stop your dish from being absolutely delicious? No, absolutely not. So that paprika is still worth using, but also consider maybe using it through something like coconut milk, or introducing it with avocado, mashing it with avocado. Again, where is that fat, the whole food fat, that ends up sort of carrying that flavor through? Let's talk about toasting spices. So toasting, you have this dried ingredient that once was this, glorious fresh thing, right? So whether you're talking about rosemary, and when I say spices, yeah, herbs and spices are all one to me, because you're adding flavor through them. The use of them is all categorically the same. So I think you could probably get technical and begin to argue with me that one is not, for our purposes here, and where I store them, how I store them, how I use them, how I think about them, where I buy them, it's all the same thing to me. So it's just kind of where I'm going from. So things like rosemary, imagine a stalk of fresh rosemary, right? Highly aromatic, potente. I mean, a lot of flavor to it, but also resinous. It does have a tanginess to it. It has this assertiveness to it, right? And then smell your dried rosemary, and it's not the same, right? It has been reduced down. That water has been evaporated out of it. Those oils, those active chemicals that are in there, the olfactory chemicals as well as the sensory chemicals, organoleptics, I guess, sort of not go into hibernation a little bit, but they kind of go into, they go to rest as well. And when you toast the spice, what you're doing is you're sort of waking that up again. You're heating up those oils, the volatile oils, you're heating up the aromatic compounds from them. And so you're just making that spice more accessible, and just kind of waking it up. And think about it this way. Would you rather have a conversation with sleeping Bart or with awake Bart? I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that I am more interesting when I'm awake, right? I mean, I may be, wacko if you're talking to me in my sleep, but bottom line is wake things up and you're just going to get more out of them, right? It also changes the, I think its willingness to kind of play along with other flavors and factors. So by toasting them, all you do is just a dry pan, whether or not you're talking about just a little sizzle pan that you put into a toaster oven. I tend to toast spices just on the stovetop. I get a pan that I know how it heats up really well. So I don't use like a heavy bottom pan like a Le Creuset or cast iron. Why? Because you're putting so much energy into heating up that pan that you kind of lose a little bit of control over how much heat is going into those spices. You just want something nimble, a quick, just a regular old saute pan is perfect. Something that's just going to transfer the heat. And all you want to do is just keep them moving, spread it out. You can keep it moving generally, and just till it begins to warm through. Then you're going to really begin to smell everything. You're going to begin to just get that sense that they're enlivened, awakened. Spoon it out right into a bowl, whatever container you're going to be using, and there you go. You are ready to use them. You can toast spices together if there are generally about the same size. If you're making your own garam masala or curry powder, which involves dozens of ingredients, you can toast them all at the same time. It's fine. There are some spices that I toast in order to really change their character, though. Some things like brown mustard seeds, regular mustard seeds, as well as fennel seeds. I like to toast those until they pop. And literally kind of pop open, the same way that you pop a piece of popcorn, right? In that way, you're really toasting them, drying them out, changing that flavor, also changing their texture a little bit, getting them crispy. However airtight the containers I have them in over here, there's still humidity in there, etc. So you're really drying them out. And if you're going to be using them whole, is in terms of like a vinaigrette or like a little spoon over sauce, something like that, that you want that really assertive and textured presence. So the thing that we can toast, I think that makes the biggest difference in our lives, in our cooking, excuse me, would be the contents of your pepper grinder. There's a lot of spices that I recommend buying. Well, most culinary professionals would tell you, I'm going to back up a step here, would tell you to buy all of your spices whole, toast them and grind them just as you need them. Come on. Like, just not, no. I don't have time for that. I really don't. I have the equipment for it. I've got a nice mortar and pestle. I've got a couple mortar and pestles. I've got some nice grinders. I don't have time. And honestly, I think kind of the quality of what I've got, if I'm buying fresh spices and using them frequently, you're there already. So don't go nuts about this. But the thing that would improve our cooking the most is toasting our black pepper or whatever you use in your grinder. To me, black pepper, though I'm going to go on a rant here. You ready? Here comes the rant. Yeah, people misuse black pepper. They just don't know how to use it. And it's problematic because almost all recipes call for salt and pepper, right? Because we use them when? Well, at the same time in our cooking, ostensibly. But here's something. The salt makes things taste, well, more like they are. Pepper makes things taste, well, more like pepper, right? Not everything needs pepper on it. And I think mostly few things need pepper on them at the beginning of the cooking. You lose control over the quality of your pepper because if you're going to put it on your broccoli and then roast it for 45 minutes, guess what? You are roasting those tiny little cracked seeds for 45 minutes and they're going to get bitter or they're going to over roast and lose their really aromatic compounds. To me, it's just, okay. We put so much effort and interest into our cooking. Why would we give up so much control over something? Pepper to me is beautiful for the spice, the piquancy. It adds that little potent pop of contrast that it offers with flavors. And to me, that's best done right at the very end, over the top, and you can see it. I mean, you can smell it. Everything is just blooming right out of that. The heat of the food that you've just put it on is like, oh, I got this. Hey, pepper, I'm going to wake you up. And it becomes this wonderful, effusive, beautiful thing, right? And it's visually compelling. It's interesting. It's this little confetti that's all over the plate, but it's a confetti that we know what it is. And so it's like pleasing to the eye and everything. Like, wow, that to me is a really good use of an ingredient. So it's my rant about pepper. If you're going to use it purposefully, use it with control, and to my opinion, use it with very few exceptions at the end of cooking. Any of you who are eagle-eyed or who have been with me before, who might have heard my rants before and who know about how I see the world, I view the world through fennel-colored lens. Yeah. To me, fennel is it's the most lithe, elegant, charming, ebullient, charismatic, and also team player flavor that there is. It doesn't belong in everything. Like my son had a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios this morning. Doesn't need fennel. Everything else, I'm kind of a fan of putting fennel in. As I said, I buy fennel seeds by the pound. Fennel is different than anise or anise, a flavor I also like, which is highly more licoricey. But fennel is floral, a little bit of pine aroma to it, a woodsy, resinousy, but also just kind of a charming floralness to it. So why am I talking about fennel? Well, because it's my most used spice. Also because I have it in here. Because pepper, to me, pepper is very interesting. It's wonderful. Buy really good peppercorns is the other thing I forgot to say about that. Just you know what? There's so many good online sources for spices now. We'll talk about those in a second. But just buy fresh peppercorns. They're just like garlic. Like garlic has a season, right? You pull it out of the ground and it's fresh. It's appealing. It's wonderful. It's great. And a year and a half later, it's kind of a nightmare, right? well, peppercorns and spices, kind of the same thing. Peppercorns have a season when they're grown and they lose qualities. They also change qualities. They just become a little more blunt, just more spice without the floral, spice without the beauty. So anyway, buy good peppercorns. I use Telecherry peppercorns. There's a lot of different kinds. Telecherry is what I use. And then in my grinder, I think that pepper can be a little bit monodimensional in some ways. So I add fennel in equal parts. I have toasted fennel seeds and toasted black peppercorns. And when I fill my grinder, I fill it up to about here. Why? Because this is 8 ounces of capacity right here. That's a lot of spice to just sit there. Where? Directly above my stove where it's hot, where you're not supposed to store your spices, if you remember what I was saying earlier. So do as I say, not as I do. Anyway, the other thing that I like to add into this is I crush up and add a little bit of allspice. So in here is equal parts black peppercorns, fennel seeds, and then probably one, like, I guess 5% not juniper berries, allspice berries. Allspice berries, well, I'm going to be right back. I'm going to grab those. They look a lot like peppercorns. They're called Jamaica pepper in one of its colloquialisms. Why is it called allspice? Well, from what I read on the internet this one time, it has like clove, mace, nutmeg kind of flavors to it. It smells like all the spices. Allspice. Those Brits, they're so clever, right? Anyway, allspice adds a very sweet, very floral, very, very fruity tones to it, like nutmeg, mace, clove, etc. But it doesn't overpower or add that warm baking spice flavor to it, especially because it's countered by the floral and piney aromas of the fennel as well as the black pepper. That's my little blend. Does it go on everything? No, but it goes on so many things in my house, and it's just what I like is that complexity of things. So that's what I use. So there's a little spice tip for you. So I'm going to take a question here. I think I've ranted enough. I'll speed it. There you go. All right. Let's take a question. Hey, Ken. How are you, buddy? If we're doing our own spice blends of our own making, could you please give us a guide as to how certain groups of spices do or don't go well together? Yes, and I'll be right back. And I left my resource on the other side of the room. It's my room, so I have to go far. So there are so many spice combinations that can be done. There are so many that are already sort of a fluent part of modern and global culinary that I can't really necessarily give you an exhaustive answer. Bottom line is, if something tastes good to you, then it is a good pairing, right? To me, a piece of salmon, I'm a big seafood guy. That's what I do. Salmon with all of its lusciousness and the depth and richness of flavor to it can take some spices like allspice. It can take a little bit of mace or nutmeg, some of those warm spices that sort of bring out that richness in it. It also pairs incredibly well with chili flake, that chili and that slight heat of something like a gochugaru. I think I always get that wrong. The Korean chili flake or urfa pepper, another one of my favorites. What that does is it sort of helps to balance that fat and that richness in the salmon, the same way lemon juice kind of balances out in a vinaigrette or with salmon. So is that a spice combo that many people have thought of? I'm sure many have done, but it's not something that is necessarily out in the world, maybe, but it makes sense to me. And this is why I think it's so important. What I was saying earlier is like, once you get a spice, really use it. Even if it's a spice like black pepper that you think think about how you're really using it. What are the purposes that you're trying to accomplish through using it? And once you really begin to conduct sort of that self-examination of where spices are in your cooking and get to know their different presence, then you begin to be able to create these intricate sort of matrices of how things begin to work together. Okay, so that's the very long answer that requires a lot of cooking, some trial and error, hopefully a couple good glasses of wine to see what pairs with what. But here's another great resource. So this book, published in, geez, I think I'm an author of 8 books. I know where to find it. Published in 1996, Culinary Artistry by Andrew Dornenberg and Karen Page. I'm raising this to you now for your question, Ken, specifically about what spices go well together, but also because this is, I think, maybe the most important food book I own that I have ever read in terms of its helpfulness. Karen and Andrew, 2 people who I admire greatly and think the world of as people, interviewed basically every really great chef in America in the early 90s and put together all of their thoughts on just what goes together. And you end up with a whole book of kind of flavor combinations that work. So these 2 pages, page 52 through 53, are flavor pals. And these are spices and what other spices go well with them. There you go. It's that easy, right? There's your list. This is better than anything I could ever put together because it's the minds of people that are much smarter than me. What's the rest of the book, you ask? Well, it's a lot of words that are very smart. But then it starts with an A to Z of basically every single ingredient you can think of. So here's lima beans, and here's all the things that go really well with lima beans, as thought of by America's greatest chefs from all sorts of different culinary and cuisine backgrounds. There's white beans. There's beef heart, which, everybody's always asking me, what should I pair with beef heart? Cardoons, carrots, things that are in bold are items that are particularly well suited to go together. And it just keeps going on and on and on and on. And it has a whole spice section in the back as well. I cannot recommend this book more highly to you as an answer directly to your spice question here, but really as a means to educate yourself just as a sentient cook. Plus, look at them. I mean, that was 40, 30 years ago, but they're so cute. They're just wonderful people. I love them. Anyway, there you go to that. So my friend Patrick behind the scenes here has just put up that link there over at the top of the question queue for Andrew and Karen's book. You can find that book everywhere. So from Judith T, taking another question here. So glad to see you back. Yes, dear friend. Thank you. I was hoping you would join and see this one. Bit off topic. Could you talk about miso and the different types and how they're used? Thanks. Judith, not really. Sorry, I don't really know a whole lot about miso. It doesn't fall into my sort of wheelhouse. I do know that there are differences in the salt content, in the depth of fermentation of them. I have a feeling that my friend Lonnie Rader, which I got your text, Lonnie. I was so excited to see that. She was texting me to say that she would be on this event today. So Lonnie Rader, I think, would have a lot to say about miso, as she knows a lot about fermentation and interesting things, which doesn't help anybody because I'm not sure how much Lonnie could type in there as a comment quickly. But miso, to me, the different types, the one that I am using right now in my food, and I use it for vinaigrettes. I blend it with yogurt as a nice little sauce for fish. I blend it with olive oil and use that as a marinade for fish. It's especially good with scallops. But the type of miso that I'm using right now is a blonde-ish miso in color. And it's made from chickpeas. And it's made here locally by a company in Maine that is doing that. And I know that with the overwhelming sort of surge of interest in fermentation recently, Judith, that I'm beginning to see localized, regionalized miso brands really popping up. You no longer need to just rely on the grocery store. But I would bet that if you have access to a good farmer's market, as I'm assuming you do out in Evanston, that you're going to be able to find something out there. And I would recommend that you talk to that fermentation guru about it, as they will be able to help you a lot better than I can. But I do know that it does have, salt component to it in many cases, and so it acts as a seasoning component. So it's taking the place of salt and other things. So it might be a bit off topic, but it's actually right up the alley in terms of what we are talking about here today. So I'm sorry I don't have a better, clearer answer for you, Judith, but I so appreciate you. All right, Rebecca G. How to keep spices fresh and how often should they be replaced to maintain freshness? Sure. So we talked about that before. So keep them cool. You can keep them in the freezer if you'd really like to. I think that's a little bit overboard. I would rather just use them copiously. You can buy spices in those tiny little jars, so you don't have so much to store, really. Or as I've said earlier in this broadcast today, just use them up. Once you buy it, just plow through it. Find other ways to use it. Introduce spices into all of your other dishes, whether it's your roasted chicken, your roasted broccoli, cauliflower steaks, whatever it is, your raw beet salad with walnuts, and hey, allspice pepper and fennel seeds would go really well in there. Also, maybe with some cracked caraway. Just figure it out. You know what? You're not really going to go wrong. So to me, best thing to do is just to keep eating your spices rather than have to try and maintain them for long periods of time. But you do want to keep them away from air contact. So airtight lids, jars, keep them sealed, keep them away from light. So as I mentioned earlier, do as I say, not as I actually do. Because in my kitchen, I just use things often enough that I'm not worried about the quality. And I'm also buying initial quality I'm buying at such great initial quality that I have a very long way to fall, as opposed to random supermarket product that wasn't great quality to begin with when it went into the jar and then might have been sitting there for 2 years, etc. You have less way to fall off the quality cliff there than you do the fresh stuff. So great question, Rebecca G. Thank you. From Peggy L. I want to buy new pots, pans, and skillets. Woo, good for you. Treat yourself this Valentine's Day. I like it, Peggy. Many people suggest I consider all-clad. I'm interested in the copper core all-clad line. Would this be a good choice? What are the drawbacks? Okay. To be perfectly honest, I have not had the greatest experience with all-clad. I haven't had bad experiences, but I've had better experiences with other things. What I use, let's answer your copper core question. I know a lot of people, including Chef Thomas Keller, who's like the greatest chef in America, who is all about all-clad. So take what I'm saying with a grain of spicy salt. Get it? I'm doing this, but anyway. All-clad is a very good brand. It would not still be around if it wasn't. The copper core is very good, copper being the most conductive of all metals that are feasible to use. I have copper pots. I also have a gas stove, which apparently I'm a heathen now also as well. I've been trying to get rid of all fossil fuels in the house, and this is the very last thing that we have. But I have invested so much in my gas stove, and and we have enough. Anyway, I'm not going to get all the gas stove thing, but I have copper pots. They work. I mean, they are the Lamborghini / Ferrari mashup of pans. They also cost about as much. And I did not get myself a Christmas present for several years in order to buy my copper pan set. They're pretty expensive. They're also gorgeous. And in my kitchen where we live in this pretty much one room, that's a big part of our aesthetic here. There's multiple factors at play. All-clad pans are absolutely gorgeous as well. The copper core, what that does is it sandwiches the copper, that very conductive metal, between the two layers of the steel. And what that does is it just helps with that conductivity and helps with that heat transfer. A very good thing. The more reactive and responsive your pan is, just the more control you have over it. So what do I have in my kitchen? I have Mauviel copper. I also have a bunch of different Le Creuset pans, because when you need a good deep bottomed heavy pot for braising, for searing, sauteing, that's my go-to. A couple other brands that I know are really good and are getting a lot of attention right now. And I would take a look at Made In brand, Madein. I think it's 2 words, Made In brand. They've been getting a lot of traction. They have a lot of good chef endorsements from people who I know and who I trust, would not just throw their name for dollars on things, but who do really believe in the quality of those products. I think they're even on sale right now. I might have gotten an email or a mailer about that. So they have some very handsome pans. They're very elegant looking. They're durable from what I understand. I have not used them, but there you go. That's what I think about. Get yourself one good non-stick pan, preferably not a toxic one. Right, just throw that out there. The Made In, the Misen brand, I think all of those, you're pretty in the clear in terms of the toxicity and the perfluorohydrocarbons or whatever that are in there. Yeah, so one good non-stick pan. Yes, I can tell you that my copper pots are non-stick, and that I always get them just to the right heat level, and I use just the right amount of oil, and my fish never sticks. But that would be a lie. You know, I'm a professional chef who's cooked 1 million pieces of fish, maybe 2 in my life. And yeah, I still get it to stick. So you know what, a non-stick pan, it's kind of money. Like, just, you know, there's no shame in that, even for me, right? So get yourself a good non-stick, just for eggs, if nothing else. And there you go. All right, Peggy L, I hope you enjoy. Happy Valentine's Day to you. I hope this is a treat for yourself today. From Lily B, hey, Chef Barton just bought the book Vegetarian Flavor Bible. What is the best way to use it to know what kind of spices and herbs to use for the food? I actually don't know the Vegetarian Flavor Bible. I'm going to look that up as we speak, because I can do that. Vegetarian Flavor Bible by Karen Page. Oh, well, Karen wrote it, so it's good. There you go. So same author as was the Culinary Artistry and their second book together, which was the Flavor Bible. And now they have the Vegetarian Flavor Bible. Just leaf through that book. If you've just gotten it, read it cover to cover. Anything Karen puts on the page is worth reading, just flat out. And knowing what she's done in her past and the quality of work there, I know that she must have transferred over a lot of that knowledge into that new book as well. So I think just leafing through, you're going to find all of those spice recommendations, those spice flavor pal pairings, etc. So yeah, just on strength of the author of that book, I'm going to say all you need to do is just dive in. So I hope you enjoy it. Lily B, thank you for joining us today. Appreciate it. You know what, that pepper that I ate earlier is gaining on me. So excuse me. Okay. Deborah S. Hi, friend. Are there some basic templates we can use to hit the various world flavor profiles as we learn to cook without recipes? Huh. Yes. Yes. But there's a lot of them. I mean, I'm thinking about cuisines that use a lot of spices, Mexican cuisines, Southeast Asian cuisines, where you're going to have North African cuisine. So I lived in North Africa for a time, and I'm always surprised by a new spice blend in the souks that I would find in the markets there. So yes, there are some basic guidelines. I think the culinary, because when we were doing this, we were looking at one. So go to the culinarypro.com /global-flavors. And I think you will like that. I think that was a pretty good one that worked well So Patrick, I hope you got that. It's the culinarypro.com/global-flavors is a pretty good list of just kind of where things are in terms of the cuisines. It's also a pretty great website just for a number of different reasons. So check that out. But yeah, buy a good cookbook from each of those. I know you said cooking without recipes, but Deborah, those recipes are a learning platform. They are a learning template that are very helpful. So pick up a book by Rick Bayless. Pick up a book by Madhur Jeffrey. Pick up a Murad Lalou's Moroccan cookbook. Books like that are going to give you those real foundations for each of those regions and really talk you through why those work. And once you cook a couple of those recipes, then you really begin to get that deeper intuitive knowledge of things. Sure, we can just learn on our own, or we can rely on the wisdom of our elders that have been cooking for a very long time. And really great chefs and authors like the three I just mentioned really do offer that depth of sort of anthropological knowledge of why these things work. So there you go. Cheers. Good question, Deborah. And I like the direction you're going in, because that's how I cook, is just kind of, hey, what's today? And then just go for it. But I also have a very lot of culinary books that I have read under my belt, so can't go wrong there. All right. Oh, Lonnie piped up. Lonnie here. 2 important fermentation books not to miss from me. So in fermentation books in general, Sandor Katz's Wild Fermentations and Jeremy Umansky's Koji. Absolutely. 2 incredible books. Judith, that was to your question about miso that Lonnie Rader is responding to here. Judith, I know enough about your culinary interests to say that you would probably really, really dig Sandor Katz's fermentation book, especially. It's just a beautiful way to add so much depth of flavor into everything that we're doing in the kitchen. Also just a fascinating read, I think, for a culinary mind such as yourself. So I second the recommendation on those 2 books. Thanks, Lonnie. Hope you're great. All right, we got a bunch of questions still to go in just about 15 minutes. So I'm going to keep my answers a little bit shorter here. Try not to cook without salt for elderly parents, but need some taste in food. They do not like Ms. Dash. Can you give a suggestion that would be good to taste for food? I don't know if No Bull product is still on the market. Lonnie, maybe you could try it on that one too. I know Lonnie Rader. She was one of my mentors at the Culinary Institute of America when I was there. And then she started doing a low salt food additive, not additive, a low salt vegetable base that basically took the place of salt. It was really incredible. I don't know if that's still on the market, but something else that I've come across recently, green salt. So this is a dehydrated salicornia, which is sea asparagus or sea beans, which sometimes you might see fresh in stores like Whole Foods or fancy food markets, etc. But it is an ocean plant, so it thrives in salt water. It itself has a potassium-based salt, so it doesn't have the same effects and impacts on our cardiovascular and circulatory systems. I am not a heart scientist or a heart-trained nutritionist, but I teach alongside of a couple who do recommend this. It's very high in other vitamins, minerals, and nutrients that also help to boost flavor while not necessarily adding sodium. So this is something that I have come well to use and really like it. Yes, it has a rather green flavor to it, which honestly, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it works. And it works really well, and it's a delicious flavor, umami rich. So it adds sort of this unctuousness at the back of your palate that fermented foods do. That really gives you a lot more flavor base to kind of play with and draw out a lot more of the inherent flavors. So sure, try it on green things that already have a green flavor, like roast on your roasted broccoli, etc. It's pretty astounding what it does. And look into the website and into the product for a little bit more. But it has, just reading the back of the label, 50% less sodium than normal salt. There you go. That's what I recommend, more so than Ms. Dash, but also just regular old spice blends, whether you're talking about harissa spice blends, whether you're talking about Mexican spice blend, whatever it is. There's so much flavor and depth of interest that is gained from spices that really makes food a lot better. And that's, to me, salt makes things taste more like they are, right? All that's really doing is making the broccoli more interesting to you because it's there. And then we get so used to salt on the palate that things without it taste flat, right? Well, it's because they've not been perked up. So spices really do that by continuously adding interest to the palate. Because, whoa, what's that? Oh, it's a new, different flavor combination, and just it keeps things lively. The other thing I recommend is acid. Limes, lemons, citrus, vinegars. I make my own vinegars and have a whole range of them back here. Vinegar acid also acts like salt in that it makes things taste more like they are. It just brightens and enlivens them. So those are my 2 tips for you. Cool. Peggy L. Hi again. I was planning to make a 13-bean soup and bought a package of 13-bean soup mix. That's a good start. When I soaked the beans, they start opening up and basically falling apart, and they were wrinkly. Is this a sign the beans are not good to eat? Why do they fall apart? Because they were old. Plain and simple. There it is. Those 13-bean packages, things like that, basically beans bought in a store, you're sort of playing with last year's crop to start with. Rarely have I bought a bag of beans at the grocery store and just been like, wow, these are really good. These are really good. Yeah, they fall apart. I don't, 13-bean soups are always kind of a bit of a gamble in that you have 13 different things that cook in 13 different rates. Some of them might be similar, but there are 13 different products that you're going to cook all at once the same way, right? So of course you're going to have some differences there. Plus some of them, like lentils, are meant to break down, so they add some body and texture to the dish. Are they bad to eat? No, they're still perfectly fine and healthful and good. Are they as delicious as they could be? No. Are they as sort of have as much product integrity as they could have? No. Are they worth eating still? Yeah, sure. Until, I turn you on to Rancho Gordo beans. I grow a lot of beans here. They're particularly good with garlic. I live on a garlic farm. I'm a garlic farmer. Soy campesino de ajo. And so I grow a lot of beans as well, just to nutrify my soils, provide green manure. So I have 14 different kinds of beans that I'm planting this year. A lot of them are heirloom Native American beans. But I mix them all together, mostly. These are the very last of my crop from last year. So I've got all these delicious things, from tepiary beans to Nana Agnes beans to all sorts of different, I got good stuff in here. So I mix them together. That's not the problem. But why I got onto this is to say these are fresh beans. When I soak these beans still think that they are a viable plant, or that they are going to send up a viable plant. Their integrity is still there. So when you soak them, as you would before you put them into the ground, that bean's like, oh man, beanstalk coming up, right? But you let that bean sit around for 2 years in a package like those 13-bean packages that are kind of flimsy, and they get all bruised and beat up and battered and exposed to air and just dried out. Who knows what humidity they were stored in, etc. Those beans are just kind of like, I'm out, right? They're no longer vibrant. So yes, beans are actually kind of a seasonal crop. So that's why they fell apart. That's why you had some difficulty in cooking them. I'm sure it was still tasty, but I would recommend that unless you're going to follow my life motto, which is why do anything if you can just overdo everything instead? So unless you're going to follow my motto and just grow 14 types of beans along with 2,000 heads of garlic, Rancho Gordo Beans is a farm out in California as well. They might have some other contract locations, but they grow beans. They sell them that season, and they are the very best beans that you can buy anywhere. They're online. Are they expensive? They're more expensive than the 99-cent bag of Goya beans. Yes, but they are worth it. They taste like everything. They're so wonderful. You will eat them and you're like, oh my God, beans are delicious. This is incredible. It will revolutionize the way you think about beans. The same way if you buy a really good bag of polenta that was just milled from a really cared for heirloom variety of corn, it is an epiphany. Rancho Gordo beans available online. So there you go. Peggy, I like your questions. Thanks. Miriam, hi. Is it possible to provide us some videos or links to explain more about the types of knives, their uses, or how to use them for all kinds of fruits, vegetables, and meats? I believe that we do have those videos in our knife section. Do I have any other sources in terms of that? Not off the top of my head, but you know what, Miriam? We have got your email address, not to be creepy about it, but when you signed up for this event, we got your email address, and I will ask our team over at Rouxbe if we have something that we could send along to you in addition to what I've just said. So expect to hear from us. Cheers. Thanks, Mary. Mitch, hey, buddy. Nice to see you. I'm experimenting with some new spices and read about Seeds of Paradise. I ordered some to try. Any suggestions on use? Thanks. Yeah, Seeds of Paradise, Grains of Paradise. I've not really used them very much. I know that they have sort of a not a sweet-ish taste to them, but let's see. Do I have that still up? No, I don't. How would I use them? I would use them, put them along with some fennel seeds and some black pepper, grind them up together, put them in a little mortar and pestle, grind them up together, and use that as a little pepper blend. I bet you would find that pretty interesting. If I remember correctly, Grains of Paradise are as well, like in the parsley family, as are dill, fennel. So I think you're going to find some analog if you use them in the same way that you use dill seeds or fennel seeds, caraway seeds. I think you'll find some analog there. I know that Grains of Paradise are essential to bear spice, the wonderful East African spices coming out of Eritrea, Ethiopia. So they mix well with Grains of Paradise mix really well with chili pepper as well to kind of perk up some of that, as well as I know they have a lemony sort of citrusy flavor and aroma. So think to kind of pair them along that line, like what goes well with citrus, it's going to pair well there. So that's my guidelines for you. But have I ever really used them to any extent? No. So, but I drink them in Allagash beer. I think they have Grains of Paradise, or Blue Moon beer has Grains of Paradise in it, which I've always found kind of curious. Anyway, there you go, Mitch. Good to see you. Andrea, hi. Yes, storage of spices and which ones can handle long-term storage? What's the best way to store dried spice and how long can they stay? Fresh is great for some spices, but I use infrequently, have basic spice. I can take camping. There you go. So if you're going to take some things camping and you have little, containers that you already have to take with you, I might suggest sort of portioning spices out and then just putting them in the freezer, in small little blocks. Something that's kind of ridiculous about putting spices into the freezer is that if you take them right out of the freezer and open them up, basically expose them to air, they're going to condensate even on a micro level, and so you kind of moistening them before you try and use them, and they can gum up a little bit and the flavor can kind of get muted in a way. So it's kind of this weird thing that you need to let them come up to room temperature before you open them, expose them to the air. So little tiny vials, little tiny bags that are airlocked, sandwich, snack bags, etc. I hate to introduce more plastic to the world, but little snack bags that you can divide up your allspice into kind of usable sections. The freezer is going to keep them the longest because it's out of light and it's as cold as possible. So as long as you don't have any air going through them, I think you're fine. Things like cloves, which are very high, like that's the most potent of all spices. If you put it in there, guess what? Your fish sticks are going to taste like cloves. Your ice cream, it's going to taste like cloves. Your frozen peas are going to taste like cloves, which kind of sounds delicious, doesn't it? Yeah, but maybe not in the uncontrolled way that would entail. So anyway, that's my best advice for you. I also hesitate to say to buy just the smallest packs possible, just because it's inconvenient to, well, the plastic that it's creating. But also, it is the very most expensive way to buy them. But if you're really determined on quality, if you're really determined on that freshness, then those extra few dollars might be worth it to you. Cheers. Thanks, Andrea. Miriam again, hey, what's the best way to dry herbs, and I differentiate which herbs are preferred to be used fresh or dried? So I don't really use a lot of dried herbs. And the reason why is that fresh herbs are now so widely available to us, right? I mean, every grocery store, when I was growing up, you could find flat leaf parsley. And that was it. Like I remember seeing cilantro and curly leaf parsley was all you could find. I remember seeing cilantro and flat leaf parsley begin to show up in typical American grocery stores. I grew up in an El Salvadorian, Eritrean, Ethiopian neighborhood, so I had a lot of spices and a lot of herbs available to me. But I remember that, and the fact now that we have, and I think that, taking a step back, I think that a lot of Americans just have this like, hey, we should have dried herbs because our parents did, and that was the only way we really had access to this, unless you had your own garden. So fresh herbs are now so available. Yes, they're expensive. It's ridiculous to buy a little plastic pack for $2.89. But you know what? If that's going to make or break your dish, hey, that's good money for me, right? And I have the ability to spend that money, so I'm very lucky. I grow my own herbs all summer long. I have about 2.5 seasons worth of fresh herbs as I am here in Maine. The herbs that I use dry are basically the hard herbs: rosemary, lavender, thyme. Why? Because those are resinous. They're added at the very beginning of a cooking process, so they have the time to leach out their flavor, to exude their flavor out, as well as to rehydrate a little bit so they don't become distracting in their texture. If you were just to crumble dried rosemary on something, it's okay. Thanks for the pine needles in my food. Let them rehydrate. The other, the dried herbs that I have over here, in addition to that, is oregano, because it's such a charismatic flavor. It is a soft herb. Fresh oregano and dried oregano basically shouldn't share the name because they're entirely different things. So that's the same with that. But like with dried parsley, with dried tarragon, dried basil, do they add something? Yes. But to me, the ebullience that comes from the fresh herb that is now so easy to get is worth it. So there you go. All right, Ken, hey buddy, I prefer not to use, or at least minimize the use of oil in my cooking. If I'm tempering spices prior to blending them with the food in my recipe, could you please tell me if all tempering needs to be done in oil, or can some spices be tempered in water? Yeah, so some are water soluble. A lot of spices are, in fact. It's really the capsicums, so peppers, that I find are really best when they're bloomed in fat to carry that flavor throughout a dish. Basically, everything else can be done dry and then integrated into the dish. I wouldn't temper them with water, as you're using that term. So I wouldn't like put some water in a pan and the spices and simmer it together so much as I would dry toast it in a pan with no water, no oil, remove them from the pan. And then once your cooking process begins, when it's time to add the spices, add them in, all your other ingredients, and that way they're going to integrate best. So no need to use oil. And if you are going to use oil, you really don't need to use very much at all. So if you're trying to minimize and not remove, as I've read there, for those capsicums especially, that small amount of oil might be worth it. Cool. Jody, when should you use powders versus spices? So I guess what you mean there is entirely ground up versus whole spices. So let's think about peppercorns, right? Or allspice berries, or what else do we have? Cloves. Cloves is a good one. No one wants to eat a whole clove. Like, no one I've met or ever cooked for wants to eat a whole clove, right? It's a piece of wood. It is literally a part of the branch of the tree, of the bush there. So it would be really distracting and really kind of annoying to have cloves, whole cloves in a dish. A whole allspice berry is that big, right? I mean, it's the size of my iris there, my pupil. You wouldn't want to serve somebody that. You could leave them whole if you're maybe steaming some rice with it, as is a traditional in Indian food where you have a whole cardamom pod that is steamed in with the rice. I don't recommend eating that. Right? It's just way too potent. Some people might very much enjoy it and actually look for that. But really, the difference there between whole and ground is what is the texture going to be. If you're making a chicken stock, throw in whole spices. That's fine. You don't need to use their whole spices. Maintain their freshness and integrity a little bit longer. Why? Well, they just have less surface area. As soon as you grind something, pulverize it, right? You've exposed the entirety of it to air, as opposed to the whole berry. So you're going to get a brighter, freshener flavor out of this. So that's my answer there. So we're coming up towards the end of time. I do want to mention something. We haven't talked about sources yet. So I have two sources that I recommend. The first is Scordo, scordo.com. They're a family here in Maine that I really, really like. They do really wonderful things, and I really just like supporting their business. So much so to the point where I even made my own line of salt blends with them that are wine pairing salts. And I'm just going to shamelessly, but also with a little bit of shame and pride, tell you about them. So basically, it's Chardonnay salt, Pinot Noir salt, Pinot Grigio salt, Cabernet salt, Merlot salt. The idea is that these will bring your food closer to your wine. It's a blend of seasonings. Chardonnay has Maine sea salt, amchur, which is green mango powder, paprika, fennel, porcini powder, ginger, allspice, and vanilla, all mixed together with salt. What that's supposed to do is sort of reflect a little bit of the flavors that you're commonly going to find in a glass of Chardonnay. So you sprinkle this on your salmon, throw it in the toaster oven, and Tuesday night, all of a sudden, you've kind of got gourmet without having to worry about coming up with this whole composed dish that all fits together. It's just as simple as Pinot Grigio spice, which has sea salt, lemongrass, fennel, onion powder, mint, and mace to kind of mimic its cool flavors. Let's see, what's in the Pinot Noir? This one I really, really love. Sea salt, fenugreek, onion, fennel seed, rose petals, star anise, porcini powder, cinnamon, mace, and mint. These are all delicious on their own, but they're also really wonderful and complex ways to add a lot to your food and wine. So that's all to say that I recommend this company, Scordo, so much that, well, I chose to work with them. The other company that I would recommend to you is some new friends of mine, Burlap and Barrel. Oh, the camera's still following me. Do that. Let's try and freeze it. There you go. Burlap and Barrel, online source. They do a lot of really, really fun stuff. They've got some spices that you can't find anywhere else. Just some single variety, single source, like cinnamon, called Royal Cinnamon, that utterly blew my mind in terms of its quality. So ethical sourcing on both of these companies. So they're making sure that these are coming from people that they're themselves and their lands are being treated with respect in our global economy. So there you go. Okay, I got a couple other questions I can answer, and then I do have to run. What spice will you use when you please outline what brand to buy, best way to store? Okay, there you go. So Catherine P., we've answered that a couple of times, as well as the two brands, Scordo, and those wine salts, by the way, well, anything you buy at Scordo, if you spice it up, you get a 10% off. So thanks, Ruby. Thanks, Scordo. So check them out. So Patrick put that one up there. Chef, can you discuss choosing the right vinegars and your favorites? Jamie, yes, absolutely. So my favorite vinegars are the ones that I make. Why do I make vinegars? Because I drink wine and my wife does not. And I have decided that in my life, 0 glasses of wine is too little. And 4 glasses is too much, right? So after a couple of days, I end up with some vinegar on the side, or not some vinegar, some wine left over, just that half glass, that one glass it's still in the bottle. It's just a little bit tired. So what I did is I started combining those. I bought a live culture vinegar, and I just started adding those bits of wine into that. I now have a barrel, and I've been doing this now for 14 years, adding my leftover wine into this barrel and bottling it. So I love red wine vinegar. Just personally, I think it's the most complex and sort of useful across the board vinegar. I throw it in anything. There's no rule about which vinegar you can't use necessarily, but a good red wine vinegar, and I'm not talking about a crap vinegar that has caramel color added to it to make it red. No, good red wine vinegar. Spend some money on it. It's going to be one of the most prominent ingredients in any dish you use it in. You spent money to get a good piece of fish. You spent money to go to the farmer's market to buy good vegetables. Don't put factory crap vinegar on it. Just don't. It ruins it. So spend some money on vinegar, no matter what you do. You don't have to spend a lot of money. I'm not talking about the hundreds of dollars of balsamic, aged stuff. Like, is that great? Yes. That's not what you need. Spend some money on it. I also make my own cider vinegars, etc. I have time and I think about these things. But the ones that I have in my kitchen are absolutely my go-tos. The one that I don't make is sherry vinegar. And I use so much sherry vinegar that I buy the Saffi brand, Saffi. I buy it in 3-liter boxes twice a year. So that's a lot of vinegar, right, folks? Yeah, well, it needs a lot of vinegar. Sherry vinegar is far more potent, and that's when I want just a little bit of flavor and taste from that potency of it. So if I'm making an aioli, for example, and I'm adding in just a tablespoon of vinegar, maybe even a half tablespoon, I want that potency, that pungency, all of that. If I'm doing anything else, from sauteing my zucchini with olive oil and garlic, and then finishing it with a splash of red wine vinegar and just tossing it all together so the zucchini juices and the squash juices and the garlic and the olive oil all emulsify together into this bright, oh, it's just so happy. Red wine vinegar is my go-to for that. White wine vinegar is a good stand-in there, but otherwise, unless you want to be like me and have 7 different kinds of vinegar, because I overdo everything, a good quality red wine vinegar, find one that you really like, spend some money on it, make that your go-to. All right, 2 more questions. Any techniques to grill delicate whole fish without it falling apart? What other ways do you cook delicate whole fish if you're cooking outside? Sure. So one really good way to do this is don't move the fish. Okay, so if you're grilling, there's something called indirect grilling. So here's your grill, right? I've got a Weber kettle grill. I put all my fire over here. And when I put the fish down, I put it down right over the fire. And so I get it nice and hot. You get the sear on it. You know what you don't need is crosshatch grill marks. Are they pretty? Yes. At the expense of feeding your fire instead of your family? Nope. Right? So when you put your fish down right in that very hot spot, you're getting all that caramelization, that crusting, that char, that beautiful smoky, rich flavor of all the juices dripping down in and flaming back up. Woohoo, right? Why we grill. And then what I do is I pick up the whole grill grate and I turn it around. Why? Because now my heat's over here and my fish is over here, right? And then I put the top on. What have I done? I've created an oven, basically. I've captured that flavorful heat. You're still getting that grill flavor, right? But now I've captured it. And now it's cooking slowly, low. You have a lot of control over how much to cook it. As well, when you go to take it off the grill, that is the first time that you are touching it before you remove it from the grill, right? There you go. Put it on, take it off. Why? Because you've created an ambient environment in which the heat is cycling over it, cooking it from the top, but not necessarily so much from the bottom, where it's cooking it evenly. So indirect grilling method. Start hot, don't move the fish, move the whole grill grate, right? And then guess what else you have? Empty grill grate on which to grill your broccoli or your asparagus or whatever else. So another tip is whenever you put something on a grill, have a plan to get it off. So if you've got this long, thin piece of flounder and you're going to put it on the grill grate and the grill grates are going in this direction, right? And you put that flounder across them, you've got to literally pick and pull under every single grill grate to get it off. If your flounder's here and your grill grates are here, great. Put them on like that. So guess what? You put your spatula under here and you're off. There you go, right? Anytime you put something on the grill, already have a plan of how to take it off the grill. Pretty basic. There you go. Another thing I would recommend, fennel fronds or banana leaf, something like that. Fennel fronds, put them underneath. You're still going to get that grill flavor. You're not going to get the grill char, but you're going to get some smokiness coming out of those fennel fronds. It's going to protect the whole thing. You pick up the fronds, the fish goes with it. There you go. It's protected. Cool. What's the best way to dry out and store herbs grown in warmer months? Sure, from Eunice. Hi, friend. Nice question. I appreciate it. So a food dehydrator is the best way to do it, unless you live in a very sunny, warm environment where you can string up a clothesline or something with, just literally string up the herbs onto that and just let it dry out in the wind and sun. There you go. That's the purest way to do it. Food dehydrator is the next way to do that. That's what I use up here for my chilies, for my fennel seeds and other things that I grow, because I love fennel seeds so much that I grow my own, as well as my own coriander. So there you go. All right, one more question. Are there any ways to preserve fresh dark greens like tarragon, basil, etc. for future use? Yeah, here I don't try and dry them. I puree them. Get a good high-speed blender, make a puree out of them with some oil or with some water, and then put them in ice cube blocks, freeze them, and then have them so you can pull out just what you need at any given time. Just enough oil to turn the blades. You might want to think about putting some sort of antioxidant in there, such as like a little bit of garlic or some citric acid, just to help keep that color bright. But otherwise, if you blend it quickly at a very high speed, put them into ice cube trays that you kind of have to use for this purpose only, because guess what? Your ice cube is going to taste like after you just throw some basil in there. Delicious for cocktails. Kind of weird for your glass of water, though. Anyway, so there you go. Cool. One last question. All right, Chrissy. Oh, boy. Hey, friend. As we set out driving this week from Iowa to Missouri to Mississippi, Florida, Tennessee, and back to Iowa, wow, I'm curious. What are your observations about regional differences in the application of spices in recipes? I appreciate your positivity. Well, always, Chrissy. Well, it's so wonderful to have you join. The regional variations in spice blends are really what migration patterns happened. Is there a large African American population? Is there a Cajun Acadian population? Or did the Cajuns and Acadians come down through there on their migration towards the south? Did the Great Migration north happen with the African American influences and diaspora coming up towards Chicago, et cetera? Really, that's what I see more than anything else. Is in food we trace our history. In food we find the pathways that led us to today. Are you in a Lutheran town in Minnesota? Well, your spice use is going to be pretty limited there to just that sort of cultural inputs. You can have a lot of caraway seeds and some juniper berries and stuff like that, some onion powder, garlic, but you're not going to have grains of paradise, or you're not going to have gumbo filet or whatever else it is. So really, I think as you're going along here, something very interesting to note is how food manifests itself. And maybe the best way to see that is if you're going through the Midwest and Western Southern states there, is to think about eat their chilies. I've always found that like beef chili is that is the go-to telltale way to understand sort of a local food culture. And there's some weird ones out there. Chilies made with ketchup, chilies made with tomatoes, chilies with beans, people that'll determine that they think you're going to the underworld in the afterlife for putting beans in your chili. Who knows? But anyway, it's all fun. All right, everybody, 3:20 here. I've got to run. I so appreciate all of you. Please do take a moment of gratitude before your next meal. Whenever you pick up that knife, just say thank you for all that we have and for those that we were able to feed. The world needs more love, and you are in a prime place to spread it, because the act of feeding someone is the act of kindness. It is an act of love. And I appreciate you and all that you are giving to this world. Thank you all. Join us again soon. Appreciate you.